Your relationship with money started long before your first paycheck. Let's talk about why. You may know a subscription is unused, yet doing nothing can feel safer than canceling it. The contradiction is simple. The charge continues, the service stays mostly untouched, and the decision remains open. Now, the discomfort often sits in the action, not the payment. Keeping the subscription requires no fresh declaration. Canceling asks you to make one, and that can turn a quiet expense into an explicit judgment about a past choice. This is where omission bias can matter. Inaction may feel less blameworthy because nothing visibly changes, even though the financial commitment continues in the background. Loss aversion can deepen that hesitation. Canceling may feel like confirming that earlier payments did not produce the value you expected from them. The question is not merely why the subscription remains, it is why pressing cancel can feel emotionally larger than allowing another ordinary renewal. Financial passivity can look uneventful from the outside. A rarely used membership remains active, an app stays installed, and the next review is postponed again. Each postponement avoids a difficult moment, but it also preserves the same unresolved decision. The cost continues without receiving a fresh evaluation. The pattern becomes clearer here. The person may remember the subscription perfectly well and still avoid acting because awareness and decision are different steps. Forgetting removes the issue from attention. Omission bias is different. The issue may be visible, while inaction still feels like the lower risk option. That distinction matters because reminders alone may not solve the problem. A reminder can expose the charge without changing the emotional meaning of cancellation. The financial consequence is continued payment. The psychological consequence is that the decision remains suspended, allowing the earlier expectation to stay unchallenged. The key distinction is this. The original purchase and the current renewal are separate decisions even when they appear inside one continuous subscription. The first decision asked whether the service seemed worthwhile then. The current decision asks whether it still deserves money under present behavior and priorities. Sunk cost attachment can blur those questions. Earlier payments may begin to feel like reasons to continue, although they cannot be recovered by another renewal. Omission bias adds another layer. Because continuation happens automatically, doing nothing may feel neutral while cancellation feels like the only active choice. Yet neutrality is only emotional framing. In practical terms, allowing the charge and stopping the charge are both decisions with different consequences. This is not a character flaw. A passive option can feel psychologically quieter because it avoids a visible break with the expectation attached to the purchase. The subscription may also represent a future possibility, returning to the gym, finishing the course, or becoming more consistent next month. That possibility can have legitimate value, but it can also delay reassessment when the imagined future repeatedly substitutes for present use. Consider the next decision separately. What matters now is not whether the original purchase was understandable, but whether another payment fits current reality. Canceling can appear to close the door on the hoped-for outcome. Continuing keeps that door open even when no concrete plan supports the expectation. Loss aversion can make that closure feel more immediate than the gradual cost of staying. The emotional loss is concentrated. The financial cost is dispersed. The two costs therefore arrive differently. Cancellation creates one noticeable moment while passive continuation divides the consequence across ordinary billing cycles. Because the charge feels routine, it may attract less emotional attention than the act of ending access. Visibility, not only value, shapes the decision experience. Omission bias can also reduce the sense of authorship. When nothing is changed, the continuation may feel like something that happened rather than something chosen. That reduced authorship can protect self-image. It is easier to describe the subscription as still active than to say clearly that you decided to keep paying. Understand the mechanism. Avoiding an explicit choice may protect you from immediate regret, but it also prevents the current option from being judged on current evidence. The unresolved subscription then carries two stories: what the service actually provides now, and what continuing it allows you to keep believing about later. Those stories should be separated. Current utility concerns actual use, access, convenience, or preparedness. Identity concerns what cancellation seems to say about you. When they remain fused, a small financial decision can feel like a verdict on discipline, ambition, or follow-through rather than a review of present value. At this point, the decision becomes easier to analyze when it is reframed from "was the purchase a mistake" to "what does the next payment buy?" The first question invites defense of the past. The second limits attention to the future benefit that remains available from this point onward. This shift does not erase disappointment. It simply prevents disappointment from serving as the sole reason to extend a commitment that no longer fits. The current decision should be separated from the past one. Earlier spending explains how you arrived here, but it does not automatically justify the next renewal. A rational exception matters. A rarely used service may still provide standby access, convenience, protection, or flexibility that the person genuinely values. Low usage, therefore, does not automatically mean the service lacks value. The comparison depends on what access provides, how likely it is to be needed, and what alternatives exist. The limitation matters here. Omission bias is not the only possible explanation. A person may continue because cancellation is premature, temporary circumstances changed, or future use is planned. A conceptual example is a travel service kept during a quiet month because a specific trip is approaching. In that case, continuation may reflect planned utility. Another example is emergency access that is rarely used by design. Infrequent use can be consistent with value when readiness itself is the benefit. These exceptions prevent a simplistic rule. The issue is not whether low-use subscriptions should automatically end, but whether continuation has been actively justified. When the only justification is avoiding the feeling of loss, the emotional response may be steering the decision more than the service's present usefulness. The opening contradiction can now be resolved. Canceling feels harder because it concentrates responsibility, acknowledges changed expectations, and makes the loss visible at once. Continuing feels safer because it preserves possibility and avoids a decisive statement. The charge remains familiar, while cancellation feels like a new event. But the financial choice is not between loss and no loss. It is between accepting the past cost and deciding whether to add another future cost. Once that distinction is visible, cancellation no longer needs to prove the original purchase was foolish. It only needs to answer whether continued access earns its place now. The same logic protects legitimate continuation. Keeping the service can be reasonable when the next payment buys a specific benefit you consciously choose. The pattern becomes clearer here. Active continuation and active cancellation are both valid outcomes when each is based on current value rather than avoided acknowledgement. Awareness may not remove the hesitation. It can, however, reveal why one option feels emotionally quieter and help prevent quietness from being mistaken for safety. The goal is not to force a painless decision. It is to recognize that discomfort can accompany a financially coherent choice without invalidating that choice. Resolution comes from separating three elements: money already spent, value still available, and the emotional meaning attached to ending the commitment. Only the second element can justify another payment, the first cannot be recovered, and the third deserves acknowledgement without being allowed to decide alone. Now review the subscription as if it began today. Ask what concrete access, convenience, or protection the next payment would purchase under current circumstances. Then compare that benefit with the cost and with realistic alternatives. Keep the analysis specific rather than turning the decision into a judgment about your identity. Consider the next decision separately. A pause, downgrade, cancellation, or conscious continuation can each be appropriate depending on actual value and available options. Set a defined review point when uncertainty is genuine. A future date tied to a real event is different from an indefinite promise to decide later. If continuation is chosen, name the reason in practical terms. If ending is chosen, allow the earlier purchase to remain a past decision rather than a lasting identity label. This response can follow a recognizable pattern. The useful question is not "why did I ever buy this?" but "what am I choosing from this point forward?" Financial clarity does not require contempt for the past. It requires giving present value more authority than the discomfort of admitting that circumstances changed. A deliberate decision can respect both the original hope and the reality you face today. Understand the pattern, change the behavior. See you next time.